Hello and welcome to another edition of Cracking the Cryptic, where today what I want to talk about, unusually, is yesterday's video. This was a video in which Mark solved a classic Sudoku from Norway, and this has caused quite a lot of discussion online, actually, because Mark reached a point fairly late in the solve where he used bifurcation, aka guessing, to make progress. And a number of you were wondering whether or not there was a logical way of making progress. Now, Kyle Corbin, who has helped us a great deal on the channel before with his pincers and pivots logic, pointed me in the direction of a discussion he was having with another viewer called Thunderhop, where Thunderhop identifies that there is a way of thinking about the position Mark reached logically and without needing sort of excessive chaining in order to make progress. And I thought it would be interesting to take you through it. Now, the reason I think it's worth a brief study is that it's not a technique that really appears in an online solver. So if you put the position that Mark was in into an online solver, the solver sort of resorts to chaining. And I'm not the greatest fan of chaining, as I think it's often hard to see logically, at what point you need to start the chaining process. So let's talk firstly about the basis for the logic in the method that Thunderhop found, and it's the classic YWing. Now, YWing is a complicated Star Wars sounding term, but I prefer the term bent triple. Not ventricle, as someone amusingly wrote to me the other day. They thought that I was describing a technique called the ventricle and spent a long time online searching for it. No, bent triple. And a bent triple, we can see it in this left-hand diagram here. So if we look at the numbers 2, 5 and 7 in the top 3 rows of the grid, you can see we've got this cell can only be a 2 or a 7, this cell can only be a 5 or a 7, and this cell can only be a 2 or a 5. Now, if these 3 cells were all in the same row, none of us, I presume, would have any difficulty in saying, well, they would form a set on the numbers 2, 5 and 7, and we could eliminate 2, 5 and 7 from any other cell in that row, because obviously these 3 cells form a triple. Now, where the triple bends, so it's not in a linear direction. You can see here it's sort of this cell is in row 2, these two are both in row 1, and the triple is bending round. We can still do some logic if the middle cell, this pivot cell as it's called, can see both the other cells. So you can see that because this cell sees this one, it's in the same box, and it sees this one, it's in the same row, we can do some logic. So we can say, what happens if this cell is a 5? If this cell is a 5, this cell here is going to be a 2. If, on the other hand, this cell is a 7, this cell here is going to be a 2. So we know that in the finished solution, we'll either see a 2 in this square, or we'll see a 2 in this square. That is absolutely forced. And therefore, we can hunt in the grid the cells that see this square, and if we find any such cells, we can remove 2 as an option. And therefore in this puzzle it's very helpful because this cell here sees this cell, and therefore it cannot contain a 2. It's impossible. So we'd remove the 2, that's why it's highlighted in red, and we would get a single 5, and that would help us to complete the puzzle. Now let's go back to where Mark was. So Mark was in this situation. Now, if we hunt in the grid at this point for bent triples, it's not easy to find anything. Now, the odd thing here is we have what I'll term an extremely bent triple. So if we look at, I want to look at 3 cells. I'm going to highlight them just to make it very clear. I want to look at this cell. Just make sure I've highlighted it. This cell. And I want to look at this cell as well. And if we look at the 3 cells I've highlighted, again, you can see if all these cells were in the same column or row of the grid, we'd have no trouble seeing that this was a bent triple on the numbers 1, 8 and 9. Now here, we don't have a YWing. And we don't have a YWing because if we take any of these three cells, let's look at this one, which feels to me like it's the natural central cell. This cell does not see this cell. It sees this one, that's fine, but it can't see this one. Now it needs to see this one in order for it to be a classic Y-wing. And so we don't quite have any logic we can do if we just look at these three cells in isolation. What we have to appreciate here, though, is that actually there is a sort of a logic we can apply, because we can look at these two cells. And these two cells provide the link between this cell and this cell. Because when this cell, well, let's go through it. When this cell is a 9, you can see this cell will be forced to be an 8, and therefore this cell will be forced to be an 8. And once this cell is forced to be an 8, it links to this cell by forcing it to be a 1. And therefore in this sort of extreme Y-wing, or extremely bent Y-wing situation, or extremely bent triple situation, or I think Kyle suggested we should call it a mirrored Y-wing because of the effect of these two cells, we're able to do some logic. We're able to say that either this cell is a 1 for sure, but if this cell is not a 1, this cell will be forced to be a 1. So we know one of these two cells has to be a 1 in this situation. And the reason, again, just to reiterate it, is because the bent triple, this cell here, this pivot cell, manages to make a connection with this cell due to this 6-8 pair. Now, once we know that this cell here, for example, this cell here sees this cell and this cell cannot contain a 1, you can see all of a sudden this cell becomes a little bit more restricted. It can only be 5, 8 or 9, but the critical thing is not really what this cell can be. It's the fact that now if we look at row 4, there's only one place a 1 can go, and that's in this square here, and that cracks the puzzle. So here we have a very interesting piece of logic. As I say, I don't think this is unspotable by a human, and that's why I wanted to talk to you about it in a video. Some of the very exotic techniques I dispute how often a human could spot them. But Y-wings, definitely, we can all spot those. We do it a lot of the time on the channel. This arrangement here, this bent triple round the corner, linked by these two cells here, I think that's spottable, and therefore I thought you might be interested to view it. If you enjoy the content, please subscribe to the channel. We really appreciate it. Unusual video today, no new puzzle. I'm not sure whether I'll release another video just for you puzzle addicts out there later as well. But anyway, that's this video. Thanks for watching. We'll be back soon with another edition of Cracking the Cryptic.